On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks pull off a strong second half comeback, erasing a double-digit deficit in the first half of this game, dominating the second half against the Milwaukee Bucks, giving Milwaukee their first loss of the season, doing it all without Trae Young, and in the process, an AJ Griffin coming out party, strong bench performance. The kids were more than all right in this spot. We'll have all of that and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1344 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Monday evening into Tuesday. And thank you for joining us on the podcast and making us your first listen each and every day. Check us out across podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and also YouTube on the video side. And today's show is brought to you by Sweatblock. If you or someone you love is experiencing embarrassing sweat or odor, try Sweatblock and save 20% on promo code LOCKEDON at sweatblock.com, also available on Amazon. And today's episode is going to break down what became a very interesting game for the Hawks. At the end result was a 117-98 win over the Milwaukee Bucks at home. It was the first loss of the season for Milwaukee, and they had come in riding high in a big way, and the Hawks trailed for pretty much the entire first half. Trae Young missed this game for Atlanta at home. They were down by as many as 14 points, and then the second half happened, and the bench went crazy. The starters played better in the second half as well. It was a 59-28 extended run to begin the second half, and the Hawks kind of cruised down the stretch. Some garbage time in the mix as well. The Hawks led by 20-plus points, and that was definitely a big-time swing from the first half, but a fun night across the board. AJ Griffin with a huge game, a career best for him. DeJounte Murray with more strong performances, and we'll get into all the nuance as you are always accustomed to on this podcast, but certainly a fun win for this Hawks team, a third straight win, and they are 7-3 overall and 4-1 at home this season. A nice start to the season through the first 10 games of the calendar. So, as we always do, we'll dive into what transpired here. This is a rematch of the game about 10 days ago on the long road trip where the Hawks had a close loss in Milwaukee. As noted a second ago, Milwaukee was undefeated and number one in the entire NBA. In fact, Nate McMillan referred to the Bucks as the best team in the league, both before the game and after the game. So certainly some respect there from the Hawks. The Bucks are not at 100% full strength. Chris Middleton, an all-star level player, is not playing for Milwaukee, but he's been out all year long and have been playing really well. Defensively, the Bucks came in just absolutely dominating this season. They were number one in the NBA in like multiple categories: overall defensive rating, defensive rebounding, shooting efficiency allowed, all those fun things. But the Hawks did a good job on offense in this game, and they held what has been a pretty average Bucks offense down in a pretty impressive way. Again, sort of the headliner before the game was the absence of Trae Young. So Trae came into the day on Monday listed as questionable with right shin soreness. That was a different listing than what happened on Saturday. He left the game on Saturday. And by the way, if you want to listen to more about that game, I did a full podcast reaction to that entire game and the Trae injury, etc. It was originally listed as a calf contusion that morphed into a shin soreness situation here. And then honestly, I thought he was probably going to play. Usually when Trae is listed as questionable, he has a pretty good record of being out there, but with about 75 minutes before tip-off, they downgraded him to doubtful. As soon as that happens, it's like, all right, alarm bells. And then he was ruled out about 20 minutes later. So no further update on Trae since the pregame and since that downgrade actually happened in the middle of all the fuss of the nice win for the Hawks. But we'll get more on him later on. But obviously playing without him is never easy for the Hawks. They have done a pretty decent job in full games without Trae. That's something I want to sort of stress in this spot is that, a lot of times there's been studies about this, about the NBA. It's not just the Hawks. If the team's best player is out for the game and they kind of know that, they can game plan for it in a short sample size. The Hawks have done a pretty good job. I remember in previous years, the Hawks had a couple of nice wins with Brandon Goodwin at the point with Trae out. It does not mean that Trae is not going to be very, very important to the team moving forward, of course, but they were 3-3 without him last year. They were competitive. And the Hawks, by the way, had basically played every single minute of actual rotation basketball, non-garbage time with either DeJounte or Trae on the floor, except for the one brief stretch where Trae was actually unavailable to come back in the game recently on the road. But this is the one sort of spot where they kind of knew going in, they're going to have to play, 10, 12, 15 minutes without Trae or DeJounte on the floor. The game plan for that. And just as a note here, I'm knocking on wood as I say this, but the Hawks have been pretty healthy this year. I know the Bogdanovich situation looms. I've talked about Bogey a lot, and they definitely need Bogey to be there at their absolute best, but he was the only guy who had missed a game coming into the night. So the first 9 games of the season, only having one guy out is pretty good luck in terms of injury stuff. This is the first time that anybody other than Bogey missed a game, and it happened to be the best player on the team with Trae. Speaking of Bogey, no change there. There was some talk from Travis Schlenk before the road trip actually came to a close. They might have to have him ramp up a little bit. By all accounts, he's not really done that. He's still just doing spot shooting and a little bit of running and one-on-one stuff, but nothing has been practicing for Bogey, so that's not any time imminent, I don't think, at this point in time. And the G League guys were back. The Hawks have been going back and forth between College Park and Atlanta with Tyrese Martin, as well as Jarrett Culver and Trent Forrest. On the Milwaukee side, Giannis was listed as probable on the injury report for this game, ended up playing and looking like Giannis to me, but Middleton out, as I mentioned before, as well as Pat Connaughton, a rotation guy for them, etc. With Trae out, the Hawks ended up being 5.5-point underdogs in this game at home. Now, they were 2.5 or 3 in the morning, and it went up to 5.5 with Trae out. That makes sense, naturally, but clearly that was and by the way, in the first half, it felt like the Hawks were going to lose this game for the majority of the way. They were able to kind of fight back and do what the Hawks needed to do in this spot. But they were not, quote unquote, supposed to win this one, as you might expect, even at home. So as for the game itself, they started Aaron Holiday in place of Trae. Not a big surprise there. I certainly believed coming into the day, and I actually said that after Trae was ruled out, that I thought they were going to start one of the Holidays. There was a decent argument for AJ Griffin. I did mention that on Twitter at the time. And AJ, by the way, again, had a huge game here. But hard to believe that Nate would have actually started AJ Griffin, but they certainly played all those guys and played them a lot in the second half of this game. It was Capella on Giannis and Collins on Brook Lopez to start the game. Not a huge surprise there either. Capella does a pretty good job on Giannis. And for the most part, the Hawks did an effective job on Giannis. Now, he had 25 points, but he was not super efficient in this game. The Hawks did a really good job, whether it was Capella, whether it was Giannis, whether it was Jalen Johnson, whether it was John Collins, just kind of getting in his space and doing a pretty effective job at kind of just bothering Giannis, making it a lot difficult on him the entire game. They had Aaron Holiday chasing his brother Drew around. That made life easier on DeJounte Murray defensively at times in this game. The Hawks didn't play well, though, in the early going. They went empty on the first 3 trips of the game, kind of a sloppy start. There was one nice drive from John Collins for a bucket going hard to his right. I will just circle this now. I thought Capella played pretty decently in this game, especially on defense, played very well on defense in this game. But early on, I think he missed his first 4 shots. There was a post-up. I am, for those of you who might be new listeners, I'm actually pretty high on Capella. But I cannot defend Capella taking a post-up against Brook Lopez. That's a terrible decision by all parties involved. Hawks, Capella, everyone designing that. That was not a good process decision. But he did draw a charge right after that on the next possession of the game. Actually, it was a second foul on Giannis, which sent him to the bench. And usually that's a good thing for the opposition, in this case, the Hawks. But right on cue, actually, Milwaukee had a huge run without Giannis. It was an 11-0 run by the Bucks to go up by 21-8 in the early going. The Hawks had 4 or 5 empty possessions in a row. The Bucks hit 3 consecutive threes. They made their first 5 threes overall, and everything was going wrong at that point for Atlanta. Now, they trailed by double digits for multiple occasions in the first half, but that was sort of the one biggest swing of the game against the Hawks was that 11-0 run in that first quarter. Rotationally, notably, it was AJ Griffin as the first sub of the game for Aaron Holiday. I like that decision. I wrote that down in the moment, so I'm not cheating here. They just kind of had to get Aaron off the floor to get him back in the game when DeJounte was going to sit, because they had to kind of plan around not having Trae. And generally speaking, I do like AJ Griffin with the starters because he gives them that spacing element. I've talked about this a lot in the last, really 4 months now, but especially the last couple of weeks. The Hawks don't really have that dynamic spacer, especially without Trae on the floor, and AJ kind of gives that on offense. He did have a weird kind of in-between air ball in this game. Actually, AJ shot 2 air balls in this game. It's kind of funny is that as good as he was, he had 2 air balls in the game. The first one was kind of an in-between, 10-footer that he kind of just left short, but he played very well on the whole. We'll come back to him later on. It was a Kongwu, Justin Holiday after that, and then Jalen Johnson as the 9th guy. And the Hawks only played 9 in the competitive portion, and that was kind of to be expected without Trae. Basically, Griffin taking some of those minutes, that kind of filling in around that. Collins was really good middle of the first quarter, had a couple of good buckets around the rim, had a nice sort of swipe down block on Bobby Portis that led to another basket. There was a kind of Jekyll and Hyde sequence from Jalen Johnson where he had an airball 3, but that had a steal and a dunk right after that, had a good cut for a layup that Murray found him on with a good pass on time and on target. And I thought Jalen was pretty good overall in this game as well. The Hawks were still down 11 at the end of the first quarter. And here's something I want to flag to come back to later on. The Bucks were 8 of 11 from 3 to start the game. Now, that's obviously unsustainably good. Talked about that in a moment, but Milwaukee is a team that's going to take a lot of threes if you let them. The Hawks were definitely packing the paint on purpose, and it turns out rightly so in this game, but you cannot get spooked. That's something that used to happen with Budenholzer coaching the Hawks back in the day. It's kind of similar system-wise, and that way defensively is that if your game plan is to give teams, not give necessarily, but if your game plan is to wall off the rim and allow some three-point attempts, you can't get phased by the team making some more than they probably should. And from that point forward, by the way, the Bucks basically just couldn't make a shot. Now it kind of went hard in the other direction, and the Hawks might have got a little bit lucky on how the three-point defense actually went this game. But if you just watch the first quarter, I saw this on Twitter live. People were pulling their hair out about the open looks the Bucks were getting, and they weren't even that open. They were just shooting the ball really well in the early going. But the big thing is the Bucks were 6 of 14 from 2 in the first quarter, which is actually quite good with no free throw attempts. And the Hawks really did a good job the entire way through, walling off the paint, whether it was Capella or Kongwu or Collins or even Jalen Johnson, just being big, being stout at the rim, and making the Bucks beat them elsewhere. And that was effective on the whole in this one. Offensively, though, kind of a slow start for Atlanta, despite the good shooting around the rim. But the three-point shooting had some positive regression. So it's not all about this, but basically from the end of the first quarter on, the Hawks violently outshot the Bucks, and that was probably the biggest explanation, at least in terms of like simple stuff about why the game flipped, because the Hawks went from down 11 to winning this game by 19 and being up by more than that in the fourth quarter. We'll have full coverage of this one, I promise you, and there's plenty more to get to about this game as far as the when things flipped in the second half, as well as some individual breakdowns, as well as takeaways from this one, AJ Griffin talk, etc. But first, a word from our sponsors on the podcast today. Today's show is brought to you by Sweat Block, and dealing with sweat is really never fun. No matter what the situation happens to be, nobody wants to sweat at a bad time, whether giving a presentation at work or going on a date or dealing with something like the heat in Atlanta or elsewhere in the Southeast. And in fact, sweat issues can really hurt your confidence, honestly. And we all want to be confident in what we're doing, no matter what that actually is. With that said, Sweatblock is a way to fix those problems. Sweatblock wipes are the secret to confidence, and Sweatblock wipes work for up to 7 days per use. You can apply them on a Sunday, and you'll stay dry the entire week. If you or someone that you love is experiencing embarrassing sweat or odor, Sweatblock is the answer, and is definitely the best thing to try. To try Sweatblock today, go to sweatblock.com and save 20% on the promo code Locked On. Again, that is sweatblock.com, promo code Locked On for 20% off. And Sweatblock is also available on Amazon. One more time, that is sweatblock.com and promo code Locked On for 20% off with Sweatblock. So it's underrated a little bit in the big picture course of this one, but the Hawks were better in the second quarter than they had been in the first. And while it wasn't like the big haymaker, they started things off with the bench unit playing quite well in the second quarter. It was 12-4 in favor of Atlanta to get back within 3. Griffin made a pull-up 3 that was just gorgeous early on in the second quarter. It might have even been more than that. Hunter turned the ball over twice, including one time where he just missed Griffin wide open in the corner and turned the ball over. They did it with Murray on the bench as well. If you came into the night, and I'm including myself in this as well, and told me that the Hawks were going to have 2 of their better stretches of the game without Murray, I would have been a little bit skeptical of that, given that Trae was out of the game, but they were able to do that, especially in the first half. And then Kongwu made a mid-range jump shot. They were very active defensively, with the Holidays flying around defensively, as well as Jalen having some nice moments as well. So positive stuff there. They stayed with the bench for a long time because it was working. And I'll probably say this again at the end of the podcast, but credit to Nate McMillan, who is not known for his flexibility, generally speaking, among NBA head coaches, but he was flexible in this game. He definitely leaned into the young guys quite a bit, and he sort of let those guys go because it was working. AJ Griffin played his longest stint of his career. He played 13-plus minutes in a row in the first half. That is just kind of unthinkable for the season. Again, Trae was out. That's part of it, but they rode with the bench. It was Jalen Johnson for like 11 and a half minutes straight. Murray sat like 6.5 minutes in the first half. That's not a crazy amount, but for a team that did not have Trae, you would have thought, I would have probably guessed that in a competitive game, DeJounte was going to play 38 to 40 minutes in this game. He sat for more than 6 in the first half. Milwaukee did lead back to like 9 or 10 in the second quarter at one point. They brought, actually notably, Griffin back into the game for a second stint in the first half, which is definitely a stamp of approval for how he was playing. Not a typical sub there to get him back in the game. There was a brutal call against the Hawks with about 18 seconds left in the first half. Giannis got a whistle on Capella that was incredibly late. Also, the wrong call on replay. That was sort of the loudest complaint of the night from the officiating. From the crowd about the officiating. It was the right complaint from the Hawks. Still 2 free points for the Bucks. I want to at least say that out loud. But the Hawks did go into the halftime break down only 6, and it kind of began to flip things around. Milwaukee, after making all their jump shots in the first quarter, they were 35% from the floor in the second quarter. The Hawks were chipping away a little bit. They had a 106 offensive rating in the first half, which is not very good, but only 4 turnovers, and they won the possession battle quite a bit. They had 32 points in the paint in the first half. That's very impressive. And I will just say, they got to the line a lot in the second half, but in the first half, I was reminded of this, talking about this before the game with some people as well. Without Trae, and obviously there's a lot of stuff that changed without Trae, but he is by far, and really their only significant free throw generator in terms of the offense. And if he's not playing, the Hawks are going to project to have very few free throw attempts. And that was the case in the first half of this one. AJ had 10. Griffin had 13 in the first half. The shooting did calm down a little bit for Milwaukee. They still had a 118 defensive rating. The Hawks did in the first half, but it got better and better as the game went along. And we'll sort of fast forward now to the second half, where, as a spoiler alert, things went very well for Atlanta. So out of the gate, it was 12-2 from the Hawks to go from down by 6 to up by 4. The Hawks didn't lead the entire first half. In fact, they didn't even tie the entire first half. It was 0-0 was the only tie in the first half. No lead for the Hawks. And then they flip it around in a hurry in the third quarter, their first lead of the game. After the Hawks kind of missed all the 3-point attempts in the first half, Collins made the first one of the second half for Atlanta. Clint Capella had a massive help side block on Grayson Allen that kind of set the tone a little bit defensively. It was a very, very funny sequence in the third quarter. I'm sure if everybody's watching this game, they definitely remember this one. But it was like yakety sax, Benny Hill music kind of sequence. When Milwaukee turned the ball over twice in a row, the ball was just pinging around the floor with like bodies everywhere, basically, in that entire stretch. It was basically straight out of a comedy show. And at the end of it, though, Murray found Capella, who caught it, dunked, 3-point play, made the free throw, which is not always a given for Capella, of course, and that actually went the Hawks' direction. Atlanta had a 24-9 run early in the third quarter, overall to go from, again, down 6 to up 9. Rotationally, it's pretty similar to the first half. They brought in Griffin first. He had a 3-point play immediately for him to have a career high, and he shattered his career high in this game. He was human, as I mentioned before, with another air ball later on, but that's just fine. He was being very aggressive, and he probably should be offensively. And from there, it was just kind of the same stuff, Justin Holiday, then Jalen Johnson, etc. I thought Drew Holiday stabilized Milwaukee a little bit in the third quarter and kind of scared the Hawks a little bit, getting the ball, started getting the lead back to down like 3 or 4 or so. But there were some haymakers late in the third quarter. Holiday hit a big 3. Justin did. AJ Griffin actually took a pretty bad shot, I thought, which is tough to do for him, and missed it. But the next possession was a super in control, dynamic curl catch and shoot play that like only a high-end shooter makes that play looking like that. And that's kind of a reminder of just how talented he actually is. And then Giannis had a huge dunk late in the third, but he was basically in control, and the Hawks were up by 9 at the end of the third quarter. It was 37-22 in the third. It tied the highest scoring third quarter of the season for Atlanta, and they got to the line 11 times. That was a huge thing. They were attacking the rim much more. They had 4 of 7 from 3. DeJounte was really good in the third quarter, had 9 points and 5 assists. Griffin was really good as well, and they held the Bucks down to 9 of 23 from the floor. The fourth quarter was more of the same. It started with a preposterous tip dunk from Okongwu over Giannis. I'm sure if you are a Hawks fan listening to this podcast, you have seen the replay, but if you haven't, I implore you to find the replay. I cannot share that with you on this podcast. I'm not allowed to do that, but that was an awesome play. Gave the Hawks their first double-digit lead of the game at that point in time. Just a super explosive stretch from Okongwu, who has been, not always like perfectly locked in this year. I think he's had a decent start, but he's not been blowing anybody away so far by his standards. But I remain a huge fan of him, and he was very, very good early in the fourth quarter, creating real havoc. Had another putback dunk later on. It was sort of a push shot that was also really impressive. That one on Giannis was just a rim rattler in a big way. That was a fun moment across the board. Justin Holiday hit another 3 to force a timeout. And overall, here's some numbers for you in the second half of this game. First of all, the Hawks started the fourth quarter with a 22-6 run. That's good on its own. And when that all was over, the Hawks were up by 25 with 8 minutes to go. It was basically over at that point. The first 18 minutes of the second half was 59 for the Hawks and 28 for the Bucks. You beat a team led by Giannis and Drew without Trae by 31 points in a quarter and a half. And you do it when they're undefeated and playing well. And yeah, there was some shooting luck stuff in there. Like the Bucks went really cold. The Hawks got really hot. They just outplayed them. They really did. They outplayed them across the board. And the Hawks were really hot from the floor at that point. Milwaukee was 11 of 36 from the floor and 1 of 14 from 3. through 18 minutes of the third quarter. Milwaukee didn't have a point other than they had 1 point. It was a technical foul free throw. So they didn't have one offensive point for more than 5 full minutes in the fourth quarter. And when it was over, it was over. That was basically the end of that. The bench was starting to empty with 4 minutes to go. The entire second half, even if you include garbage time, was 65-40 in favor of Atlanta. And kudos to Nate McMillan. I said it before. I'll say it one more time now. He rode the young guys, and that's not always what Nate will do. As an example, Collins, Hunter, Capella, 3 starters, 3 guys the Hawks have to have playing well to reach their big-time goals, plus Trae, of course. Those guys played 11 minutes or fewer in the second half of this game. And a part of that might have been garbage time, but they weren't coming back in their normal spot. It is because they were rolling with the bench unit. It was Murray plus the bench, and it was basically dominating in the second half of this game. He was right not to go back to the guys. It wasn't like those guys were terrible. Like I'll come back to that, the individual portions of the podcast. There were some weaknesses there, but I thought like Capella and Collins both played pretty well in this game. Hunter was just okay, but like he wasn't like he was terrible, at least with some defensive stuff. But Nate was just willing to go with it. And like sometimes you get yourself in trouble leaning on hot units, quote unquote. But in this one, it worked out very well for the Hawks and for Nate. And that was a big time performance across the board. So broadly speaking, as far as takeaways are concerned, coming into the night, I would have definitely told you that the Hawks were going to have to play good defense without Trae. Candidly, being without Trae does help the defense. That's not a huge secret. Trae is one of the bottom tier defenders in the league. He also happens to be a top 5 to 10 offensive player in the league. So there's a lot of strengths there. I am not picking on Trae. Trae is awesome, but defensively, he does not really help you. So that was part of the game plan you would have said going in was to be better defensively, create more havoc, have Aaron Holiday, who's kind of a pest defensively, replace that role, more of Justin as well, good defender, DeJounte doing DeJounte stuff. And they were good defensively, especially after the first quarter was over. So the Bucks famously, again, shot 8 of 11 from 3 in the first quarter. That was always unsustainable, but they definitely cooled off. In fact, they were 5 of 29 from 3 the rest of the game, ended up at 13 of 40, which is not like a terrible number for a team. That's 32.5%. But given where they were early in the game, that was a huge regression that definitely helped the Hawks. But they held Milwaukee to 41% from the floor. They had a 97 defensive rating. That is lights out. Now, Milwaukee had six offensive rebounds in the entire game. They had 19 turnovers. That's a huge habit creation game for Atlanta on the whole. They had 11 steals. That's a really good sort of way to juice your offense. They held the Bucks to 16 free throw attempts as well. The Hawks basically had almost a perfect game in terms of their peripheral defensive stats once the Bucks cooled off. So they just kind of did what you had to do. And again, like Milwaukee helped them out a little bit with their bad shooting, but the Hawks were just game and they played very well defensively in this game. Offensively, it wasn't a perfect game, but they played well. I mean, a 116 offensive rating overall, very good regardless. But even especially when you factor in no Trae and you factor in the opponent, Milwaukee came in with the number 1 defense in the league, and the Hawks had 6 guys in double figures. They took and made more threes as the game went along. They didn't take a ton, only 29. That's probably less than you would want, but they made 11 of them, shot it better than Milwaukee did from 3, shot it better than Milwaukee did from 2. 50 points in the paint is a good number for the Hawks. They had double the offensive rebounds that the Bucks did in this game. Only 12 turnovers, which is a good number for any team, and only 5 live ball turnovers. That's excellent. At the line, they didn't get to the line a lot. Only 17 attempts. That's below where you would want to be. But after only taking a couple in the first half, they were much better and being aggressive in the second half. So I can give you numbers all day long, but the Hawks played very well in this game. A complete effort offensively, being better than you would think without Trae, defensively being very stingy against a pretty decent offense. Well, not a great offense necessarily without Middleton. Still a good offense, and the Hawks just played lights out basketball for the final, really 36 minutes, but especially the second half. They were just absolutely dominant in this game. All right, we'll get to one more break here to hear from our sponsors. We'll be back with more on this game, individual breakouts, and all that fun stuff. But first, here we are. Today's show is brought to you by BetOnline, and basketball is in full swing now in November. College basketball is underway as of earlier on Monday, and BetOnline is the number 1 source for all the wagering information you're looking for. That includes stats and news and analysis across the board this season. You can get the latest trends and the odds at every professional and college league out there at BetOnline. That includes the latest in football and basketball and soccer and esports, golf, tennis, auto racing, horse racing, entertainment stuff, and much more. All of that and much more. Again, props, futures, all that fun stuff at BetOnline. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to get your sports betting fix right now. And if you love sports podcasts, you can also find those at BetOnline. Check out BetOnline on your mobile device or your computer to learn more about all of the trends and the action in the sports world. BetOnline, where the game starts. One thing here before we get to the individual stuff in this game is that I am going to go ahead and get out in front of this a little bit. I mentioned it briefly before, but I want to be very clear about this. I'm already seeing, I think maybe it's trolling or whatever, the better without Trae stuff that's kind of out there. That's very obviously silly. Now, Trae has weaknesses for sure, but he is one of the best 20 players in the league, something like that. However you want to say that, Trae is an awesome player. There have been studies on this. I've said it before again, but like teams are capable of playing in short sample sizes without their guys. Long-term, short-term, any term, the Hawks need Trae Young, and he's going to have to be back for them to do what they need to do. This is still a great performance, but maybe we'll see Trae get back on Wednesday. But they do need Trae, so don't let anybody tell you differently. If you have a non-Hawks fan friends that's kind of telling you like the Hawks are better without Trae, no, they're not. They're definitely not better without Trae, but they played well in this game. Anyway, as for the players that did play in this spot, I thought it was interesting. All 9 guys that played at least 22 minutes. That's very intriguing balance for a team that's not always known for that. We'll start on the bench, as we often do, and go to Jalen Johnson first. I thought he played quite well. Plus 15 for Jalen, 5 points, 8 rebounds. He had 2 assists, 2 steals, a block. He was very active on defense. Jalen, I will give him this. Defensively, he's been very active all year long. Now, he's not always in the right place at the right time, and that's been a criticism of him by me and others. I'm sure that's maybe why he hasn't played a ton in each and every game. But I thought Jalen was really good. He showed some of his on-ball skills in this one a little bit more. Rebounding, did a good job on the glass. It wasn't like he was the absolute standout of the game, but had a bunch of nice moments across the board that you definitely love to see for the Hawks. Elsewhere on the bench, Justin Holiday had a good game off the bench, 14 points on 10 shots, hit 4 of 7 from 3. He definitely needs to make shots, and he's not made a ton of them so far this year. I've said this a number of times. I'll say it one more time here. He is a 37% three-point shooter for like a 5-season sample size. I don't worry about his jump shooting a whole lot. Is he AJ Griffin? No. Is he bogey? No. But Holiday can and will make shots. He made shots in this game. And I know my friend Glenn Willis, who's been on the podcast even last week and has been on the show many times before, was pointing out some of the nuance of Holiday's defense. Justin Holiday is a good defender. He knows where to be. He's active. He executes, and definitely underrated, I think, by Hawks fans at this point in time. He definitely plays to what I like in players for sure, so I'm definitely guilty of liking role players. But I think that Holiday is still undervalued because of his slow shooting start, but I think that's not a huge concern for me. And then Okongwu was also very, very good in this game. 12 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, had a steal, a couple of highlight plays, 6-11 from the floor. Actually, wasn't as efficient as he always is. Like, it's still a good efficiency number, don't get me wrong, but he's usually been even better than this season. I thought he wasn't quite dominating in the first half. I thought his first stint was a little bit shaky, but after that, he settled in and was basically awesome. He closed the game, at least the competitive portion of the game. Rebounded better than usual, I thought, in this game. Only had 1 foul. That's a key thing for Okongwu. He's actually been averaging more than 8 fouls per 36 minutes this year. That's a huge number he's going to have to fix. But in this game, that number will come down because he was able to defend without fouling. And that second half stint that he had where he was flying around was very impressive and notable. Elsewhere on the bench, AJ Griffin. So we talked about AJ a little bit already in the game flow portion, but obviously this is one of those like breakout kind of games for a young guy. He had 24 points. That is easily a career high. I believe it was 10 coming into the night. He had 3 steals. He had an assist. He had 4 rebounds. He was a game best plus 28. As soon as he came in the game, the offense got better immediately. He was 10 of 15 from the floor. He was only 2 of 6 from 3. So it wasn't like he was lighting up from 3. Like he shot the ball okay, as he always does. But he was 8 of 9 on 2s. He was effective getting to the rim. The mid-range game was working for AJ. This is one of those times when I remind everyone that AJ Griffin was formerly a top 3 or 4 guy in that class in terms of high school status. He had the injuries. I do not believe he would have fallen to the Hawks without the injury concerns, and those maybe still are there deep down, but he looks springy to me. It looks like he's in better shape than he was in college in terms of just being a little bit more, quick twitch, that kind of stuff. And no question about Griffin's talent level. There was a reason why I was preaching that was a heist of a draft pick in the moment. I thought that it was an auto selection. Like I liked Tari Eason in the moment, but he fell there as well. The Hawks took the guy that had the highest upside, and AJ Griffin. He is really, really intriguing. Is he going to be this good all the time? No. He's a rookie. I'm kind of notoriously skeptical of rookies and them being effective. But I will say this, as I've been saying for the last couple of weeks, I don't go out on a limb and talk about how rookies need to play more. That's not really my bit. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. But with Griffin, I've been saying regularly he needs to play because of the shooting. Like the spacing, the way that he makes the offense kind of flow. I think defensively he was pretty solid in this game. He's had some moments that looks like a rookie in the last couple of games. That's okay. He got the DNP CD on Sunday. But I think that Griffin is going to play more, I hope. Obviously not quite this much with Trae being out. I don't think that you have to just like put him in there all the time. I'm not someone who's saying like he's a starter or something like that, but Griffin obviously showed his value here. I don't, it's kind of preaching to a choir that's very excited. I don't think it's smart to get like super duper carried away now about Griffin. And like, the fact that he's like going, this will not be a norm performance from him, but the talent is undeniable. The offensive capability, the way he played in this game, the confidence he's playing with, the team seems to love him. The guys seem to like him quite a bit. They were praising him endlessly after the game tonight. So a fun breakout game for AJ Griffin. I will be intrigued to see how much he plays on Wednesday, especially if Trae is back. But career high in minutes, career high in points. What do you say? It was an awesome performance from Griffin, and definitely a glimpse of hopefully what's to come if you are a Hawks fan. The starters are a little bit quieter, as I mentioned before. We'll save Murray for the end. The other four guys were of the quieter variety. I thought Aaron Holiday played pretty well in this one. Had 4 points, 5 assists, 1 turnover. Didn't have any rebounds, but like was a pest defensively. I think that I could certainly quibble of like starting him, but that definitely made sense to kind of stagger. They kind of did the reverse rotation. It was DeJounte in the Trae role, rotationally, kind of carrying the offense for first and third quarter, and then it was Holiday doing the Murray stuff, a little bit less on offense, of course. But I thought he did his job in this game. Played a lot of bench minutes, was effective. Capella, same kind of thing. He was good, not great, but good. 5 points, 12 rebounds in 22 minutes. He was all over the glass. He had a steal and a block. I thought he was pretty excellent defensively, honestly. It always looks a little bit funny when he's guarding Giannis as a center, but I thought Clint's defense was really good. His first half offense was not, I think he was 0-4 at the outset, made 2 of his last 3 shots. Not efficient, clearly on offense, so that's a problem, and occasionally is. But he was after being pretty much dominant on Saturday, he wasn't as good as that. But defensively, if you watch the tape back, like he's everywhere. He's taking up space, defending the rim, and broadly speaking, again, Capella, Okongwu, Collins, even Johnson a little bit did a great job protecting the rim in this game. And Clint is probably the anchor of that above all. Hunter had a kind of a middling game, I would say. I think defensively he played really well. Now, it's not a game where he has to play against Middleton. Kind of a weird matchup game for him. He's like guarding Grayson Allen, or he's guarding a little bit of like Javon Carter at moments. But I thought Hunter played well defensively. Offensively, less so for sure. He had 10 points on about 12 shooting possessions, so below average efficiency. 4 turnovers. The ball handling is a problem and has been all year long. I don't want to dwell on it too much tonight. It was a pretty positive podcast, but he was not very good in that area, and just kind of some weird stuff with the ball in his hands, decision-making wise. The processing is a little bit slow, but he's been worse in the past. I don't think he was like bad. Offensively, he had some bad moments, but there you go. And then Collins was good, I thought. He didn't come back in the game because he didn't need to, but 14 points on 10 shots, 2 rebounds, had a block, just played solid across the board. He was part of the protection brigade as well, had a block. Did a good job on Giannis when he was asked to do that. Played well on the whole. And then Murray had a big night, led the team in scoring with 25 points and 11 assists. Those are both team leading numbers. 8 rebounds, 3 steals. Murray was just Murray. He was really good, got to his spots. I said this to someone pregame, I think it was Kevin Chouinard, but no free throw attempts for Murray in this game. It's just there was a whole discourse about this today on Twitter that I saw before the game about the officiating or whatever. I'll just say this. Murray is not a free throw creator, and that's not a bad thing. Like, he's a really, really good pull-up mid-range shooter. He's really good in floater range. He's really actually a guy that you are totally fine with taking mid-range shots because he's so good at them. But he, for all of his gifts as an athlete and as a aggressive player, he does not get to the line. Last year, he got to the line a little bit more as the unquestioned number 1 guy in San Antonio, but do not expect him to be replicating Trae's free throw totals. And this is a good reminder of that as well. But he shot the ball very well from 2 in this game. 3 of 9 for 3 is just okay. But he was quite good, and nice to have another guy that can run your offense for 35 minutes like he did basically in this game with Trae on the shelf, because that was not an option in previous iterations of this Hawks team. All right, I am winding down as I am falling asleep at this point as we're well into Tuesday morning. I actually started recording this podcast on Tuesday. It's post-midnight. It was a late start for the Hawks. It was a home game. I had to get home, all that fun stuff. But before we get out of here, a reminder, the Hawks have a back-to-back coming up. Wednesday and Thursday, both at home, so a little bit easier, no travel in between. They play the Jazz on Wednesday and Philadelphia on Thursday. Coming in to this stretch, which we discussed at length on the last podcast on Saturday night, it's a very, very difficult stretch of schedule, and that was always going to be the case. They were playing a lot of the top teams in the East over about a 2-week period. But coming into the year, at least I circled that Utah game as like a pretty easy one. Obviously, Utah was projected to be a rebuilding team this year. They traded Donovan Mitchell, traded Rudy Gobert, Royce O'Neal, etc. And instead, they're playing great. So that's interesting to at least note. The Jazz keep winning games. In fact, they just won again. They beat the Lakers by a sound margin in this one. They, I believe, are 8-3 now with that victory. So the Jazz are not an easy matchup anymore. Now, it's still a home game. The Hawks are still, in my mind, better than the Jazz, but that is no longer a game that you could just kind of, underline in the vein of that Rockets game or the Magic game. That's like the Hawks can be huge favorites. The Hawks are probably going to be favored, I think, but not by a ton, I would imagine. And then Thursday, back-to-back, Philadelphia. We'll get into that one later on, but we'll see about Trae status between Monday night and Wednesday. I'm sure the Hawks will have some sort of practice gathering. Maybe it's just a film session or whatever on Tuesday, but I'm sure Trae wants to play. Trae hates to sit by all accounts, so we'll see if he plays on Wednesday and on both nights of the back-to-back, etc. But for the most part, a very, very positive night at the office for the Hawks. Again, 7-3 for the season. You have to take that for sure. 4-1 at home. You got to love that. They won over the Bucks, their first loss of the season. That's a lot of fun to see as well. So AJ Griffin breakout game. There was lots of like bullet point exciting things in this one. Very little to be complaining about, quite honestly. Like I think pretty much everyone was at least okay or better in this game individually. And from a team standpoint, there were very few weaknesses from this performance. Basically, after the first quarter barrage by Milwaukee shooting, it was all Hawks all the time. So thank you for listening to the podcast, everybody. We definitely encourage you to listen to the show each and every day, as well as to please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or YouTube on the video side. Do it across multiple platforms. It definitely helps us to spread the word. Also, tell a friend or tell an enemy or tell a family member, however you want to do that. Share us on social media, all that stuff. Please help us to grow the podcast. Word of mouth is the best driver of podcast growth for sure, and we definitely appreciate all of that support. 5-star ratings and reviews are also very helpful. Please follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland, and we'll see you all later in the week.